take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Monday, October 13th, 2014, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. We're also closing in on election, folks. Election night 2014 is just in 4 weeks from tomorrow. No, 3 weeks from tomorrow, I should say. November 4th, 2014, we will be bringing you our marijuana election night coverage live here from Rolla J Studios. We'll take you all the way out to Portland, Maine, from Portland, Oregon. We'll go to the Great White North of Alaska, all the way down to the Sunshine State of Florida. We got votes in Michigan and that we've got to look at, as well as California. And we'll have reporters giving us all that. Oh, and Guam. Let's not forget Guam voting on medical marijuana as well. We'll have reporters from all over the United States, and we'll see about Guam. I don't know anybody in Guam. We'll see if I can track someone down, but we'll bring you all the live coverage. You will know when the votes become final right here with the rest of us live at 420 Radio. So check that out coming up Tuesday, November 4th. All right, today's show is quite a bombshell. We've got a smoking gun revelation that we uncovered in our open records request from Jefferson County this time. The email proving that the people putting on the so-called Oregon Marijuana Educational Summit knew damn well what they were doing, that they were using public money to combat marijuana legalization on the ballot in violation of the terms of those grants and federal and Oregon election law. We'll give you all the highlights in the Radical Rant at the end of the show today. Also on today's show, it's Monday, so it's time for a dose of our cannabis science segment, live question and answer with Dr. Mitch Earlywine from SUNY Albany. He's going to tell us a little bit about marijuana and IQ studies. That's one of the talking points of the prohibitionists these days, is that marijuana is going to cost you your IQ. We'll take a look at that and debunk a lot of that scaremongering. Also, today is Columbus Day, and normally we take federal holidays off here at the Russ Belville Show, but I refuse to celebrate Columbus Day. We are going to take a Columbus Day look at Nebraska, where they are complaining about marijuana coming across the border from Colorado. I'll show you why those people are a real big bunch of hypocrites if they're complaining about that. Also on today's show, in drug war data mining, we've got a new study from the Center for Juvenile Criminal Justice. This is on the effect of marijuana decriminalization and legalization on youth in California, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Washington, and Colorado. The data show you exactly what we've been telling you for years here on the Russ Belville Show. Marijuana reform helps protect the youth. If you really care about the kids, what about the children? You'll want to join us in reforming our prohibitionist marijuana laws. But all of that comes after the 420 Radio News. And in the headlines today, we've got all sorts of great stories from around the country and around the world, including a grand jury in Georgia not indicting the SWAT officers who blew a hole into a 19-month-old kid. The Supreme Court of Guam has affirmed that their referendum on medical marijuana can go forward in the November election. We've got a gubernatorial debate in Pennsylvania that could chart the course of medical marijuana in that state. In Arizona, the Republicans there are looking to jump the gun on marijuana legalization. That's right, the Republicans in Arizona. And police chiefs in Alaska, surprise, surprise, are against marijuana legalization in their ballot measure 2. We'll take a look at why that is a mistaken position for law enforcement. All that's coming up on the Russ Belville Show. And in our second hour, we'll go into Toker Talk Radio. I've got a look at Florida's plummeting poll numbers for medical marijuana legalization and a look at what might be behind that. Also, my talk with the guys in Michigan from Planet Green Trees Radio, a new show we'll be bringing online here to 420 Radio very, very soon. So stay tuned. Plenty of content today on the Russ Belville Show.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
420 Radio, turning red states and blue states green.
My name is Ryan Basil, and I work for a textile manufacturing company, and before that I used to be a farmer. I am a supporter of Measure 91, the legalization of marijuana here in Oregon, but not only for that, for the legalization of industrial hemp. Hemp is related to marijuana, but hemp is not a drug, and we still can't grow it here in Oregon. Measure 91 will fix that. Oregon is a great state to grow hemp. We have the right soil, the right climate, and it's a great cash crop for Oregon farmers. Anywhere you can grow corn, you can grow hemp, except no herbicides and minimal amount of pesticides are needed for this crop. The hemp clothing you see at the store and the hemp seed you see at the grocery store all comes from overseas and our neighbors from the north. That's money we could be keeping here in Oregon. Farming is a difficult business, and with a cash crop like hemp, it can make all the difference.
.420radio.org is proud to replay Marijuana Compassion and Common Sense with Lanny Swerdlow, RN, from the Inland Empire, California. Lanny Swerdlow is one of the top nurses in the field of cannabis medicine, and he brings his knowledge to the Southern California airwaves on KCAA Radio in Loma Linda. Catch the replays here Tuesdays at 10 Pacific.
Measure 91 regulates, legalizes, and taxes marijuana like beer and wine.
Oregon gets the benefit of going second. We can look at Washington and Colorado and see what didn't work.
I mean, if we believe this is medicine, legalization needs to happen because there needs to be research, there needs to be development, and that needs to be not done in somebody's basement.
I don't think it is inevitable. Of all the marijuana measures, of which there have been at least a dozen, only one has passed, and that was the Oregon Medical Marijuana Act of 1998.
Once Oregon passes this and a couple of other states do, I think you're just going to see it sweep across the country and it's going to be done. We may lose a battle or two as we move forward, but the war is over.
It's time for the 420 Radio News, covering the latest headlines in consumer cannabis, medical marijuana, and industrial hemp. Transcripts of 420 Radio News are available daily on our website at 420radio.org. Now, here's Russ Belville with your marijuana headlines in 4 minutes and 20 seconds.
This is your 420 Radio News for Monday, October 13th, 2014. A grand jury in Georgia on Monday declined to indict sheriff's deputies who, during a drug raid in May, set off a stun grenade that severely injured a 19-month-old boy. County Sheriff Joey Terrell has called the boy's injuries, quote, devastating, end quote, but unavoidable, saying police who tossed the grenade to distract the suspect did not believe children were in the home. The suspect, a relative of the child, was not in the house during the raid, but was later arrested nearby, police have said. The grand jury concluded the deputies did not intentionally injure the child and were not criminally negligent. A recent report by the American Civil Liberties Union found that nearly 80% of police raids carried out by heavily armed SWAT units, originally designed for emergencies like hostage takings and active shooter situations, were being used to serve search warrants, usually in drug cases. The Supreme Court of Guam has reaffirmed its earlier findings on the legality of the medical marijuana referendum. The Guam legislature passed the bill on February 1st. It lapsed into law and became Public Law 32-134 without the governor's signature. The issue will be put to a referendum on the same day as the general election on November the 4th. Senator Tina Muna Barnes is the main proponent and is confident that the public will support the move. She says recent surveys show 59 to 68% are behind the legalization, which will allow the use of medical marijuana as an alternative treatment for debilitating health issues. Guam patients won't be allowed to grow their own marijuana. Guam's proposed act would require all marijuana sold in Guam be grown in Guam. Under Guam's proposed law, a qualified patient can possess an adequate supply. This is defined as 3 months' worth. The Department of Public Health and Social Services would be responsible for quantifying a 3-month supply of marijuana. The issue of medical marijuana in Pennsylvania has been making its way to the forefront of the gubernatorial election. Republican Governor Tom Corbett said, quote, "I do not support the legalization of marijuana for recreational purposes," end quote, in an October 8 gubernatorial debate, largely avoiding the issue of medical marijuana. He continued, quote, "It is a gateway drug that creates all of the drug problems that we are seeing in Pennsylvania and the United States," end quote. His Democratic candidate opponent, Tom Wolf, responded, quote, "We need to legalize medical marijuana immediately," but he stopped short of supporting legalized marijuana. Quote, "I think we ought to see what happens in places like Colorado and Washington before we decide to go any further with the legalization of recreational marijuana, however," end quote. According to a New York Times CBS News YouGov poll earlier this month, Wolf leads Corbett by 9 percentage points. An Arizona lawmaker plans to introduce a proposal next year to legalize recreational marijuana before a similar proposal could get decided by voters in 2016. Republican Representative Ethan Orr of Tucson aims to convince fellow conservatives that a voter-approved measure is nearly impossible to change once it is approved and not the way to set up a complex system of rules and taxes for the drug. Quote, "I would rather us as elected leaders be the ones directing the conversation and the debate and ultimately controlling the policy, as opposed to letting it go to a citizens' initiative where you can't change the law once it's in place," end quote, he said. Advocates for legal recreational marijuana are aiming to put their proposal on Arizona's ballot in 2016. 10 police chiefs met Wednesday in Anchorage to emphasize something voters have been hearing for months, that the heads of Alaska police departments are firmly against Ballot Measure 2, an initiative that would legalize and tax marijuana for those 21 and older in Alaska. Anchorage Police Chief Mark Mew had concerns that revenue would not go directly to the police force. While the initiative would tax marijuana at $50 per ounce at the wholesale level, it does not and cannot say where that appropriation would go. Only the state legislature can allocate tax revenues. Bill Parker, former Alaska Department of Corrections Deputy Commissioner and co-sponsor of the initiative, was sharply critical of the police chief's concerns. He said police are already in charge of enforcing Alaska drug laws, which he said are not working. Parker said law enforcement campaigning against the reform of those laws is just making everything more difficult. This has been your 420 Radio News for Monday, October 13th, 2014. I'm Russ Belville.
.420 Radio. Tune in, turn on, get high.
Mike Schwab is a former middle school science and math teacher. Currently, he works with Children Daily as an after-school program leader.
Currently, kids have easy access to marijuana with little understanding of its impact. We can take better care of our kids through Measure 91 with strict regulations and funding for proven marijuana education and prevention programs to keep kids from using it. Under our current marijuana laws, one mistake can ruin a life. Measure 91 removes unfairly harsh punishment for marijuana offenses and gets more tax money to local police and drug prevention. Vote yes on 91.
My name is Richard William Riggs. I'm a judge in Oregon. In 1998, I was elected to the Oregon Supreme Court, where I served until October of 2006. I've been asked to give my views about the new approach to marijuana initiative that is going to be before the voters very soon, and I'm happy to do so. I've read the measure, and I'm going to vote for it. And the reason I'm going to vote for it is because I think that it's inevitable that marijuana is coming to Oregon in one form or another. And I hope it comes in the form of a good bill like this one. If we're going to have marijuana in Oregon, this is the way to do it. Drugs and marijuana particularly play a huge role in the economic engines of most of the local gangs. The gang-related violence that occurs is often as a result of bad drug transactions of one kind or another. I think the proper legalization of marijuana and the control of it in an appropriate way is a substantial step forward to eliminating some of those problems. Using the criminal justice system to enforce certain societal social norms is kind of a waste of resources. It takes away from the criminal justice system dealing with forcible rapes and murders and so forth. I've read this measure, and I'm going to vote for this measure. And I think anybody who reads the measure and gives it careful thought will probably join me in that vote.
Welcome back, everybody. 15 after the hour, and time for us to go behind the headlines, where the headline today comes from the Denver Post. Nebraska deals with marijuana influx from Colorado. And the gist of the story is in tiny towns along the Nebraska-Colorado border, like Sidney, Nebraska, a town of less than 7,000 people, officers are making many, many more arrests for marijuana now that marijuana has been legalized than they had before. The Sidney officers say they've made as many marijuana arrests in the first 5 months of the year as all of last year. Another in Hastings, Nebraska, says 5 of every 10 traffic stops results in a marijuana arrest, and they're complaining that the police departments run through their overtime budget to pay the officers to go to court for these prosecutions. Cheyenne County complains they made 60 marijuana arrests last year, up from 45 in 2010 and just 15 in 2009. And they complain because Nebraska is one of the original decriminalization states from 1978. The possession of small amounts of marijuana is just a ticketable offense, and they want to end that decriminalization so they can punish these cross-border marijuana traffickers more severely to try to cut down on this. And every time I have to cover this story out of Nebraska, I'm reminded of a story I wrote back in May when they were first complaining about this, and it brought me to the attention of little White Clay, Nebraska. Have you ever heard of White Clay, Nebraska? White Clay, Nebraska holds the dubious distinction of being the city in the United States with the greatest per capita sales of alcohol anywhere. Little White Clay, Nebraska has 10 people. It's a population of 10, but it has 4 off-sale beer stores that you can take beer and buy it and take it away, right? That sold 3.6 million cans of beer in 2013. That's about 10,000 cans of beer per day. Now, how does a little town in Nebraska of just 10 people sell 10,000 cans of beer per day, you might ask? Well, White Clay lies on the northern border of Nebraska with South Dakota, where it directly abuts the Oglala Sioux Lakota Indian Nation on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And Pine Ridge has maintained absolute alcohol prohibition, both sale and possession, since its creation in 1889. There was a brief few years in the 70s where it wasn't illegal, but other than that, since 1889, alcohol has been strictly prohibited on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Now, illegal whiskey peddlers took advantage of that and set up in White Clay, going all the way back to 1889, and Congress created this dry buffer zone to try to protect him, and that went away in 1904 when liquor lobbyists convinced President Teddy Roosevelt to open up the area around White Clay, just south of the Pine Ridge Reservation. And soon White Clay became the home of bootleggers serving the Lakota who could easily walk across the border to get some liquor. In the 1950s, Nebraska licensed 2 bars in White Clay, and since 1970, Nebraska has licensed 4 businesses in White Clay in this town of 10 to sell beer to be taken off-site. These businesses have repeatedly been found to be selling to minors and bootleggers and allowing on-site consumption. Lakota activists have asked for years. They've called on president after president to reverse Teddy Roosevelt's 1904 order. None have. The governor of Nebraska says there's nothing he can do about it since all the people purchasing are coming from South Dakota. But I don't know, maybe as the governor, you could direct your liquor sales department to not license more stores in a town when there's just 10 of them? When there's more people passed out in the street than there are actual residents? Of course, if the governor did that, then Nebraska wouldn't pull in roughly $350,000 to $400,000 per year in the alcohol taxes it makes off of White Clay alone. Now, as for the Lakota on the Pine Ridge Reservation, as we think about our Native American friends on this Columbus Day, alcoholism affects an estimated 80% of their homes. 4 out of 5 homes on the Lakota Pine Ridge Reservation devastated by alcoholism that affects 60% of their individuals. 3 out of 5 people affected by alcoholism, when just about 1 out of 10 is the rate among the regular population. And most devastatingly, nearly 1/4 of babies born suffer the fetal alcohol syndrome on that Lakota Pine Ridge Reservation. Now, this is not a call for alcohol prohibition. If anything, White Clay demonstrates how prohibition always fails. But Nebraska can't go complain that Colorado's messing up their marijuana prohibition when Nebraska's openly flouting the Lakota Nation's alcohol prohibition. And besides, unlike a beer store, some pot shop is not going to cause fetal alcohol syndrome.
Well, Lottie frickin' God!
The whole issue just really makes me mad, especially on Columbus Day, a holiday that should not exist, or we should do what Seattle did and rededicate it as Indigenous Peoples Day. We're going to come back with a new study from the Criminal Justice for Juveniles Commission in drug war data mining. Stick around.
420 Radio, the world's voice of marijuana legalization. Are you a hypocrite? If you live a closeted cannabis lifestyle, you are. Read about 7 people living a closeted cannabis lifestyle who are on the verge of coming out in The Hypocrites by Mara K. Eaton. Available at areyouahypocrite.net. You can purchase the book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, also available on iTunes. Check out Mara K. Eaton on Facebook as well. Learn more at areyouahypocrite.net. 420radio.org presents Electric Bob's Boogaloo with Electric Bob from Scottsdale, Arizona. Electric Bob expands the Russ Belville Show's Electric Tuesday into a full show featuring the best in electronic dance music and experimental music. New every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Pacific with replays Tuesday at 5 and 8 Pacific on 420.
Treating marijuana as a crime in Oregon has failed. Police are spending way too much time working on simple marijuana possession cases. Too many people are being busted. Oregon wastes millions of taxpayer dollars while illegal drug dealers are making a huge untaxed profit. But after Measure 91 passes, we'll have a better approach, a smarter approach, like what's happening in Washington, where marijuana-related arrests have plummeted. Oregon police will be able to refocus their precious and limited resources on serious crime, and Oregon's Measure 91 can save and generate millions of dollars. Oregon needs a better approach to marijuana. Vote yes on Measure 91, paid for by Yes on 91.
Arguing for the end of adult marijuana prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It is even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more in this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Welcome back, everyone. 23 after the hour. And if you're not following me on Twitter at Radical Russ, you really ought to be, because when I find new studies come across my way, I tweet them out immediately to my followers. And this is the one that came across the desk literally an hour before showtime. I had to rearrange the show to get it in, but I had to talk about this one. It's entitled Reforming Marijuana Laws, Which Approach Best Reduces the Harms of Criminalization, a 5-state analysis. This is from the Center on Juvenile and Criminal Justice, dated for September 2014. But they ask, should marijuana be decriminalized or legalized? Should it be restricted to people 21 and older? Advocates of the latter strategy often argue their efforts are intended to protect youth. It is difficult to see how continued criminalization of marijuana use by persons under 21 protects the young. Currently, people under 21 make up less than 1/3 of marijuana users, yet half of all marijuana possession arrests. 2 types of reforms are evaluated: all ages decriminalization, that would be California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and 21 and older legalization, and that would be Colorado and Washington. And here are some of the conclusions from this report. Their first finding: states that decriminalized marijuana for all ages experienced the largest drops in marijuana arrests or cases, led by substantial drops among young people and for low-level possession. Our first chart, figure 1, shows the decrease in rates for low-level marijuana arrests and case filings by age after marijuana reform. The states from left to right in each section there are Massachusetts, California, Washington, Connecticut, and Colorado. For all ages, we saw declines from 67% to 90% in low-level marijuana arrests. But for those under 21, the states with the decrim had the greatest declines of 66 to 90% for people under 21, while Colorado and Washington had just 30% and 43% declines, respectively. So it seems decriminalization for all ages helps all ages more than legalization does. The law enforcement appears to be responding to reforms with reduced attention to marijuana across the board, from minor infractions to felonies. This does not include data from Washington that weren't available, but these are the decrease in rates of high-level marijuana arrests and case filings by age after reform. These are high-level marijuana arrests. The felony-level arrests for all ages declined from 23% to 43% after decriminalization or legalization. Buttressing the point I always make, it doesn't matter whether you legalize a gram or a pound. Once you've legalized, you've ended reasonable suspicion for the smell of marijuana and probable cause for a drug dog sniff. That's why legalization and decrim are so important. Another finding is these data suggest the most effective way to reduce arrests and collateral damage is through proactive reform of marijuana laws. This is the decrease in all marijuana arrests and case filings. The decrease for all marijuana arrests in the 4 states surveyed for which there are data between 60 to 80%. That's right, folks, from 3 out of 5 to 4 out of 5 marijuana arrests that would have happened did not happen in these 4 states after they reformed. But we find a surprising finding. Reforming marijuana laws does not reduce staggering racial disparities. African Americans were more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession after legalization or decrim than were people of all races while marijuana possession was still criminalized. Now, this is a strange statistic. You have to look at it maybe glass half full or glass half empty. Before reform, African Americans made up 742.1 of about 909 total arrests. That was an 81.6% disparity. Now the arrests are down to 251.9 out of 303. That's an 83% disparity. So yes, the disparity went up 1.5% for black people, but 2/3 fewer black people got arrested overall. I would think people would be more concerned that we have fewer black people being arrested than some slight 1.5% increase in the disparity. We also found that decriminalizing marijuana for youth has not led to increased risk behavior for things such as violent deaths, drug overdose deaths, suicide, criminal arrests, drug arrests, property crime arrests, DWIs, and school dropout rates. We saw significant declines in California thanks to decriminalization compared to California itself and compared to the U.S. national average. The conclusion of the report tells us that under 21 Washingtonians still face criminal penalties. Under 21 Coloradoans still also face criminal penalties. But by and large, marijuana regulation should happen in this country if you really want to help the kids.
You can get 420 Radio on the go with our Shoutcast stream for all internet-enabled media players. Go to rad-r.us/420shout or just click the Shoutcast icon below the live radio feed at 420radio.org.
There's so much I worry about as a mom. Stephen Harper thinks that organized crime should continue to profit from marijuana prohibition. Imagine regulating marijuana like alcohol and cigarettes with a strong and clear educational message, making it more difficult for my kids and your kids to access. Drug dealers don't ask for ID. Stephen Harper does not have the kind of judgment we need to protect our children, authorized by the normal.
Despite strong public support for medical cannabis, decriminalization, and legalization in Georgia, The state spends $121 million every year to arrest, prosecute, and imprison Georgians for simple possession. Each year, the state of Georgia spends less on driver services, agriculture, and forestry combined. What else can $121 million a year do in Georgia? With that much money, the state could hire and keep 3,000 more teachers, improve roads and bridges, provide tax relief for small businesses, repair aging sewage systems, or lower taxes. But right now, that's millions of dollars of your tax money wasted on failed enforcement. Tell your representative you're tired of wasteful spending and ask them to end cannabis prohibition. Join the conversation at www.peachtreenormal.org. Peachtree Normal is a proud affiliate of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws.
It's time for the Russ Belville Show's Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earlywine. Dr. Earlywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and a leading author and researcher on cannabinoids and health, who pins the Ask Dr. Mitch column for High Times magazine. Get your questions ready in our live chat or call in to 971-533-7111 now.
Welcome back, everybody. Half past the hour, and we're speaking with Dr. Mitch on the phone. How you doing, Mitch?
Well, I'm just back from Colorado, so I'm a little weepy.
Yeah, you had to go back from the land of the free into the prohibition of New York State. It's got to suck.
It was like turning back the clock to the 1800s or something. It was really sad.
It reminds me of, you remember the old Star Trek, the original Star Trek? There was one episode where they went back in time and Dr. McCoy saw these guys working on brain surgery with drills and stuff, and he's like, barbaric!
Indeed.
All right, folks, the phone line is open at 971-533-7111 if you've got a question for Dr. Mitch, or you can get it into our chat room here on Ustream. Just click the chat icons up there on the 420 radio menu, and you can get in as well. Our first topic, though, I wanted to open things up by giving Dr. Mitch the first word. And lately we've been discussing Kevin Sabet and his recent tour. And one of his big shiny talking points is how marijuana use is going to cause an 8-point IQ drop among chronic users. That led me to start looking up studies on IQ. And I found this one that said that basically if you paid people to do well on an IQ test, they'd do better. So I'm just wondering, Dr. Mitch, A, is there anything to this IQ loss? And B, what does that really tell us if IQ can be bought?
What's interesting is that same study with the 8 IQ points loss has a group of cannabis users who used only once a week, and they had a 5-point IQ gain.
Oh.
So I think the notion that it's all about cannabis is clearly a problem, and obviously these folks weren't randomly assigned to smoke pot every day. But the other big issue is, as the data you showed mentioned, basically some of this is a question of how forceful are you in taking this exam. My student Raina Macher had shown before that basically if you tell pot users, hey, do really well on this test because it's going to help repeal prohibition, they will work their butts off to make sure that they score well. But if you don't tell them that, they're like, I'm sure I'm happy to help you out, but they might not necessarily score as high as they could. In truth, the way the IQ test is administered is problematic in a number of ways. Often what you do is you go until people miss 5 things in a row, and then you move to the next topic, and that makes people feel kind of deflated. And if you actually give them some easy ones at the end and let them kick ass on it and then move to the next topic, they do better then. If you pay them to do well, they do better then. Clearly, IQ tests are not as immobile as our perception of IQ.
All right. Well, we've got a question coming in from our chat room that asks, as I get close to 50 and my first prostate exam is coming up, what can you tell me about CBG and where I can get it? And apparently there's some study about CBG and prostate that we need to know about.
What's funny is I want to just emphasize that the prostate exam is really no big deal. So it's not something to worry about, and you don't necessarily have to find the doctor with the smallest fingers or anything like that. It's quick, easy, and not a hardcore thing. The Normal blog had a CBG and prostate cancer growth article up that Paul Armentano wrote back in May of 2012. And the bottom line is just that it does look like folks who have prostate cancer or related cancers can respond well to CBG. Unfortunately, we don't have like easy access to CBG. This is one of those kinds of things where it's just been done with this one step. But if you've got a clinical marker like the PSA test and it's suggesting you've got a problematic issue with the prostate, there are a number of interventions that can be super helpful and are actually incredibly successful. That's why this early detection is so important.
You know, when it comes to that prostate detection, early detection, I've always felt that, one of the hurdles here in getting men to have this exam has to do with kind of a societal homophobia. And I'm just wondering, as we're seeing more and more states become acceptive of marriage equality and gay rights in general, are we seeing greater numbers of men doing having the prostate exam, or could that just be better education to get the exam?
That literature is kind of complicated in part because I think also back in the day, some of the doctors were apprehensive about doing it. When I was at the VA, I noticed that everybody seemed to refuse the prostate exam. And then when I finally talked to the physicians about it, they were like, yeah, we don't really like to do it, right? So then it was this weird dynamic between physician and patient that I think has improved in part because it's normalized so much in medical school now, and because this really is important. This is a hell of a killer, and I think it's finally dawning on folks that this really matters.
Going back to CBG for a second, one of our listeners in the chat room is saying, wasn't there an Italian study recently on CBG and colon cancer? Is that also part of what the article was?
That does ring a bell. Paul did not mention that back in 2012. The thing with colon cancer, and nobody likes to hear this, but one of the best predictors of colon cancer is how much meat and dairy you consume. And I mean, it's like, I hate to sound like some kind of vegan nut, but we got bigger concerns with our diet than we do with getting access to cannabinoids.
Okay. We have a question from the chat room. What about driving under the influence when taking inactive sublingual tinctures? Can you still get a DUI on the normal timeline as we currently understand it?
If they're actually inactive, meaning THC-free, then no. But I still want to, emphasize that we should move to roadside sobriety tests rather than measuring people's fluids, because this is just a completely insane way to keep our roads safe. I, have data showing that Benadryl impairs driving too, and we don't want anybody out there impaired, even just from fatigue. Let's not focus on what's in your system. Let's focus on, can you drive?
Yeah, that surprised me as I went around the state and I got interviewed by a couple of local media people. That was one of their go-to things was, well, this measure doesn't include any way of detecting whether people are too high to drive. And my immediate response was, oh my, how are we catching them now? It's not as if legalization makes
Russ, well put.
It's not as if legalization makes DUI legal. It's illegal now. We must have a way of catching them now, don't we? Okay, let me get to another study that I wanted to talk about here. This was the meta-analysis that came out, and it just spread like wildfire across the net, as most of these negative stories do, saying that pot use is devastatingly dangerous and akin to heroin addiction. Can you blow this one out of the water real quick?
I was blown away by this. Wayne Hall, who is a very reasonable man who happens to live in Australia, writes these review papers a couple times a year and seems to keep getting them published, so I totally envy the guy. And he just wanted to summarize a couple of key points and was really reasoned in the article itself. Then some ding-a-ling in the media grabbed on it and said, this is a review of 20 years research, and marijuana is addictive like heroin is addictive. Then that, in this weird-ass game of telephone, got turned into marijuana is as addictive as heroin, which is just completely preposterous, absolutely wacky. And so I don't know what to say except, wow, this really isn't true.
No kidding. I think anybody who's seen Train Spotting can at least make that judgment call. All right. There's another study that I saw that worried me a lot. Medical News Today had this one out saying that marijuana use does not help creativity, something that, a lot of people attribute to marijuana use. What can you tell us about this?
It's funny because my friend Ron Friedman had found evidence that basically folks who use cannabis aren't necessarily more creative than folks who don't. Lots and lots of people swear by it. We finally have a study where they actually administered cannabis to folks, and the people who got the high dose actually did worse on 2 of these creativity tests. I want to emphasize that these tests are not what we stereotypically think of as creativity, and I feel like the part that's most important from people who talk about cannabis enhancing their creativity wasn't really tested here. Nevertheless, I don't think marijuana is going to turn you into Pablo Picasso overnight. The way these tend to work is they get you really high, and then you do these divergent thinking type tasks where they say, come up with as many things that will fit this as possible, that kind of thing. And it's funny how the folks who were really high in this condition kind of got stuck in one little rut about a set of ideas. Personally, I think what cannabis does for creativity is actually about the incubation period. It's actually after you've already generated a lot of options, and then you get away from it a little while and sort of let it incubate, and then when you come back, you realize, oh, this is the idea I want to have. And in truth, that hasn't been tested yet, and I feel like that's the thing that's going to reveal if there are any meaningful impacts of cannabis on creativity.
Yeah, as someone who pumps out loads and loads of content every day and uses cannabis all day, it shocked and surprised me. But in talking to fellow creatives, what I've determined from them and my own personal experience isn't so much that marijuana leads to creativity as that it hinders self-criticism. It's like it kills my internal critic. I had a bunch of great creative ideas sober, but the internal critic told me they all sucked. But when I'm high, the internal critic says, go for it. Sounds interesting. What do you think of that? And how would we test that?
I love that idea. And in fact, a lot of folks who claim that they've got ruminative problems with their depression suggest that cannabis also does the same sort of thing. So if you're walking around saying to yourself, oh, I'm a jerk, that kind of thing, the cannabis seems to have that. And a lot of folks have reported that's the mechanism they think for behind cannabis's antidepressant effects.
All right. And one final study here. But before we go, folks, if you didn't get a chance to get your question in, you can always email Dr. Mitch at 420research@gmail.com. That's 420research@gmail.com. But this study I just pulled up an hour before the show from the Center for Juvenile and Criminal Justice shows out of California, Massachusetts, Connecticut, decrim, and Colorado, Washington legalization had amazing results for youth, including a decrease in most of the negative associations with marijuana, like dropout and crime among the youth of California. I was just wondering if you got a chance to review that at all and what your comments might be.
I only saw the abstract, and I think what this has done, in effect, is decreased contact with the underground market, and so now essentially teens don't think pot is as cool because it's not the big rebellious horrible thing that it used to be. And if they do happen to get cannabis, they don't have to go somewhere where it's particularly outrageously likely that they're going to run into hard drugs or other things related to underground crime.
It's good news. We saw it shows decreases of 60 to 80% in arrest rates in those 5 states. Across the board, not just for what got legalized or decriminalized, but for all marijuana arrests across the board. And interestingly, not a decrease in the disparity. In fact, a slight increase in the disparity of the racism of what arrests were left, even though there were far fewer arrests of Black and Latino people after these rates. We'll talk more about that on another segment, but right now we got to go. And Dr. Mitch, thanks again for joining us here on Mondays for our Cannabis Q&A.
Enjoy.
All right, folks, when we come back, time for a radical rant. We've got the smoking gun email that proves the Oregon drug prevention officials knew they were using public money to influence an election, which is quite illegal. We'll give you the details in the radical rant when we come back.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
You can get 420 Radio on the go with the TuneIn Radio app for all mobile platforms. Go to rad-r.us/420tunein or just click the TuneIn Radio icon below the live radio feed on 420radio.org. At Royal Queen Seeds, we've got premium feminized cannabis seeds, including auto-flowering varieties for the medical cannabis user. We've got bulk shipments available and new CBD oil. Plus, we accept payment in Visa, MasterCard, and Bitcoin, as well as other methods. Check out our website at royalqueenseeds.com for more information. We are located in the Netherlands, and we have online grow experts ready to help you now at royalqueenseeds.com. In the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Russ Belville Show presents the anti-drug public service announcement of the day.
This is a vial of crack, rock cocaine. As you may have noticed, it doesn't come with a warning label. If it did, it might tell you that smoking crack affects the brain, the nervous system, the lungs, and the heart. It would also say that crack can kill you. The problem is, no one knows exactly how much it takes to do it. So every time you try it, it's a guessing game. And if you guess wrong with this stuff, you die.
This has been the anti-drug public service announcement of the day. To cure this sort of reefer madness, listen to the Russ Belville Show every weekday on 420radio.org.
You can't handle the truth.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
You have offended my family.
Hey, this is great, man.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
I know nothing.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
We don't need no stinking budget.
Homosexuality, no immorality in general.
Down the centuries, you have slurred the meaning of the words we, the people.
Be warned, this is not your mother's marijuana.
You could ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
I want to ask you a bunch of questions. I want to have them answered immediately.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant. Well, folks, you've been following our coverage of Oregon marijuana election shenanigans and the opponents of Oregon's Measure 91. And again, that's our initiative to tax and regulate marijuana. You know that. Our opponents have been insisting since this summer that this so-called Oregon Marijuana Education Summit and Tour that took place October 1st through the 3rd, that I followed and placed online at Radical Russ on YouTube if you want to see it, that was starring the quarterback of the anti-legalization movement, Kevin Sabet. They keep insisting and have been insisting since summer that this annual October event was designed simply to educate Oregonians about the dangers of marijuana. In no way was it timed just before ballots are mailed out to spread scare stories about marijuana to depress support for Measure 91. They told us, no, it's just educational. Well, folks, we have caught them in their lie. According to a press release written by Mandy Puckett, the head of the No on 91 campaign, on September 5th, she said, quote, "My job was to help apply for state and federal grants and work with the local coalition to use that money to educate people about the dangers of using addictive substances." End quote. Again, touting the idea that it's just about education. You got to understand this. Mandy Puckett was a drug prevention coordinator for Best Care. Best Care was the rehab org that pulled its $15,000 of funding from the summit and tour once our attention to this issue went public. That Mandy Puckett is now the No on 91 campaign director. The federal grants that Best Care and other state drug prevention groups use are earmarked for drug education. Nothing wrong with that. However, there are very strict regulations that forbid that money from being used to influence an election, either for an initiative or for a state candidate. Under Oregon law and Supreme Court decisions,
that does not have to explicitly be vote no on Measure 91. Because even if an event clearly intends to sway an election, it doesn't have to explicitly say so. It's political. It's not educational. Now, Puckett's press release continues, quote, "This educational summit in Madras, the accompanying tour of Oregon cities, including the timing of the events, has been in planning stages for nearly 2 years, fall of 2012 to spring of 2014 to be exact, long before Measure 91 was on the ballot." End quote. Well, in October of 2012, they held a similar summit and tour starring Kevin Sabet, and there just happened to be Measure 80 on the ballot, which was our failed 2012 attempt to legalize marijuana. The materials from that event in 2012 and the eyewitness accounts to 420 Radio tell us that the 2012 summit and tour was openly political, with speakers warning attendees explicitly to not vote for Measure 80. Now, somehow, they were able to put on that October 2012 event after just 4 months of planning. But this event for 2014 required 2 years of planning? Or was it that everyone paying attention to the politics knew that Oregon was definitely going to have legalization on the ballot in 2014? Because oddly, there doesn't seem to be any planning for a 2013 summit and tour. That never seemed to happen. Now, unfortunately, the Measure 80 campaign never recognized these political shenanigans at the time for what they were: illegal electioneering with public money. But as a more astute Measure 91 campaign complained about this summit and tour, Puckett, in her press release, began trying to cover it up. Quote, "Later, when it was announced the measure would be on the November ballot," Puckett wrote, "we took extra steps to include in our work plan and advise presenters to not speak about the ballot measure. Our goal was to educate, not to lobby." Now, that's her trying to cover up for 2014, when they were trying to use the same tricks to spend public money to bring Kevin Sabet to town right before the election, right before we get our ballots mailed to us for legalization. There's her trying to cover it up for 2014. But in our investigation, 420 Radio has uncovered an email from Mandy Puckett dated August 29th of 2012, sent to Jefferson County District Attorney Stephen LaRich, entitled "Invite to Speak at Statewide Marijuana Summit." Remember, this is for the 2012 version, and legalization was on the ballot in 2012, which reads in part, quote, "Our educational event is intentionally planned at this time, as Measure 80 is on the November ballot to legalize marijuana. Ballots go out the week of our summit. Our intent is not to tell people how to vote, as it is to educate people and let them decide." End quote. That, folks, is the smoking gun, proving that Mandy Puckett, Stephen LaRich, and everyone involved in the 2012 summit and tour knew they were securing public money to put on a political event to affect the legalization election in 2012. And they were doing the same damn thing again in 2014 until we started shining a light on their activities with a crowd-funded open records request. Thank you so much for funding at gofundme.com/fightsabet. And if you want to give more money, hell, I still got expenses to pay. I would really appreciate it. But thanks to your donations of almost $6,000, we were able to uncover some of these and other emails that are all online for your perusal at radicalruss.com/docs. You can go through all of them. There's over 1,000 documents up there right now if you want to check them out. Now, just to follow the timeline a little bit, this Mandy Puckett, who's the No on 91 campaign director, as early as May 2014, Mandy Puckett was representing herself and Best Care as the Oregon SAM affiliate, meaning a state chapter of Kevin Sabet's national Project SAM organization, an organization dedicated to opposing marijuana legalization. In July of 2014, reps from Oregon SAM, according to the agenda, presented the topic, "How you can put a group together to counter marijuana ballot and legislative measures." This was part of the National Project Sam Summit in Florida in July. Part of the materials at that summit, which was timed to coincide with the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America's national conference, I guess. So managed to get them in Florida at the same time the CADCA conference was on. Now, I can't prove that any of the Oregon people went to the CADCA conference yet. But at the CADCA conference, there is a document that's handed out that's called Strategizer 31. This is a booklet from CADCA that explains how to push the limits on electioneering with federal funds. And on August 21st, 2014, Mandy Puckett was taking her leave of absence from Best Care, coincidentally on the same day the Oregonian ran their story on Best Care, pulling the $15,000 of public funding from the summit and tour. Conveniently, Mandy Puckett is leaving Best Care as they pull the public money, leaving Best Care to become the head of the No on 91 campaign. So, let's just follow the bouncing ball on this for a second. Here's what we untangle from this complicated web. Mandy Puckett combats legalization in Oregon in 2012 using Best Care's federal funds in a clearly political educational summit and tour starring Kevin Sabet. Oregon legalization loses in 2012, but all observers guarantee there will be a legalization attempt in Oregon for 2014. Then Kevin Sabet forms Project Sam in November of 2012 to combat legalization nationwide. 2013 passes with neither legalization on the ballot nor an educational summit and tour in October in Oregon. Then Kevin Sabet recruits Mandy Puckett and Best Care to be their Oregon Sam affiliate sometime before May of 2014. Oregon Sam presents at Kevin Sabet's Project Sam event in July of 2014 on how to combat legalization in Oregon. Oregon Sam plans to use Best Care's federal funds to pay Kevin Sabet for a 13-city tour, for which Kevin Sabet is asking $3,000 per city, just prior to ballots being mailed out for the 2014 legalization in Oregon. That's followed by Best Care's Oregon Sam head, Mandy Puckett, leaving Best Care to head the No on 91 campaign to combat legalization in Oregon, just as Best Care pulled their $15,000 of public money on August 21st. Followed by Oregon Sam helping to reorganize the 2014 summit and tour after Best Care dropped out, thanks to a $15,000 gift from the Oregon Sheriff's Association, and at least $2,000 raised between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. on a Friday, August 22nd, by District Attorney Stephen LaRich from his county office, using his county email, using his county phone, collecting $100, $200, and $500 donations from other district attorneys in their county offices, using their county phones and county emails. Wow. Wow. Teaching people how to secure government grant money to pay yourself $39,000 to educate them? That's one hell of a racket Kevin Sabet has figured out, doesn't he? And I got an attachment back from Jefferson County just this afternoon. I just posted it. It's in the Jefferson DA directory in radicalruss.com/docs. Jefferson DA doc 198.pdf, which is Kevin Sabet's contract. Got a copy of Kevin Sabet's contract where he indicates, I had earlier documents showing he was asking for $3,000 a city. This contract indicates that when he is signed up for those events, that the people signing him up, people buying his services, are 100% liable to pay him for the event, even if the event is canceled, if they don't rebook it within a year. Except if an event is canceled by an act of God, like a flood or, tornadoes, terrorists, whatever. And then they're only on the hook for $75,000. So that's got me wondering another little question, which is, did they sign this contract with him when it was a 13-city tour that was going to pay him $39,000? Or did they sign this contract when it turned into a 7-city tour for $21,000? Or did he just get $15,000 that the sheriffs put up for him? I've got emails showing at least $15,000, a possibility of $21,000. And if they signed this contract on May 24th, when Kevin Sabet passed it on to these county officials, that was still when the tour was 13 cities and would have been $39,000 that the county would be on the hook, that the presenters would be on the hook for, even if they canceled some of the events. More questions, and you're welcome to look through the documents and help me answer them. We're going to take this into hour 2, Toker Talk Radio. Stick around for more. We're also going to look at Florida's plummeting polls for medical marijuana. For everyone here at 420 Radio, I'm Radical Russ. Until next time, take care of each other, Tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.
You plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant